Hi, I'm KJ and welcome to my podcast, Not a Life Coach. This podcast is an account of my own experience of working a programme on a journey to get to know and understand myself better in the search of serenity and being a person I am proud of. By sharing my experience, I'm hoping to consolidate my own learning as well as being useful to others. Take what you like and leave the rest, and we'll see how this goes. This episode, I'm focusing on honesty. This is another eye-opening and fascinating topic which can enable us to discover a lot of important information about ourselves. Being honest is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as being free of deceit, truthful and sincere, morally correct or virtuous. When I first came to this topic, I thought this one was going to be easy. I've always prided myself as being a very honest person. The truth was always very important to me, and I certainly felt very morally correct and virtuous. One of my biggest offences was being lied to by others. Through my readings and conversations on this topic, I began to realise that it wasn't just about me telling lies to other people, but more about the lies I tell to myself that eventually spill out onto the world and leave me feeling guilt and shame. I'm learning from this that when life gets difficult or chaotic, then uncertainty and confusion can prevail, and it becomes really hard to see the truth, let alone admit it to ourselves. Having initially thought I'd sail through this section, I was shocked at the realisations and emotions this one brought up and how difficult they were. Therefore, the usual disclaimer, this is just my journey and my experience. I've been exploring this for over 4 years now, and anyone else's experience will be very different. But if you're taking time to think these things over too, I'd always implore self-care after doing this, whatever that looks like to you. The first question to frame my thinking on this was about when I failed to tell the truth as a child, who I lied to and the results of my misrepresentations. I thought of common child behaviours of lying to avoid disappointment or to get out of trouble, like for example when my sister and I got caught smoking as teenagers. But I couldn't think of many specific situations. It was a long time ago. The more and more I thought, I started thinking about when my dad remarried the wonderful woman who raised me and who I refer to as my mum. This was when I was about 8 years old. She was very young when they first met, and everywhere we went, people would question me whether she was my sister or my aunt, but couldn't possibly be my mum. I was desperate for a normal family and became really conscious of this. Not long after they were married, we moved counties, and the scene was set for my beginnings of denial of my actual situation and the desperate need for everyone around me to believe she was my real birth mother. I manipulated situations and forced everyone in my family to never mention the dreaded step word, and I avoided anyone who knew the truth. This was particularly relevant when my little sisters were born. I would feel absolute rage if anyone referred to them as my half or stepsisters. I can see now it was my fear of rejection or not fitting in, but I wanted to be a part of that family, and I wanted to claim that biological and assured automatic belonging as my younger sisters could. On reflection, I realised that at an incredibly young age I discovered denial meant I could create a fantasy that made me feel safe and secure, like I belonged. I had no idea how this behaviour could have such an impact on my adult life. Other instances of dishonesty as a child got me thinking of shared family stories that get distorted and the relationships I've missed out on from adopting other people's beliefs and perspectives. I believe this is very common, and shared family stories are often the most misrepresented and distorted memories that we can have. Actually, memories are a lot less reliable than we think, and there's a lot of fascinating research on this, but that's another topic. The next set of questions led nicely from these startling realisations onto dishonesty as an adult, about whether I've ever stolen something, cheated on a test, misrepresented taxes, being unfaithful in relationships, asking others to lie for me, and violating traffic laws. That was a good one, particularly interesting, because again it raised the trigger of disliking authority and being told what to do. Most of them were pretty simple to answer and made me realise, in the main, I am quite an honest person. But it did make me think over the times I have lied and why that might be, and really importantly, to forgive myself for these behaviours and let them go. The next section was about dishonest or dishonest habits. First, it encouraged me to look at deceptions I've committed for others. As I thought over these, I realised in many circumstances I have lied and deceived to protect the people I love. But by doing this, I have actually stood in their way of dealing with their own personal crises and learning their own lessons. I may have potentially prevented those people getting help and support that they needed, thinking that I would be sufficient. But in many instances, I ultimately denied them of finding their own way. It made me realise this is how I can be overbearing and controlling, thinking that I know best, when really the right thing to do is not to stand in the way of other people's crises, as often these are in the natural order of things. I am not God. I do not know what's best for anyone other than me, and I'm certainly not in control of anything except my own behaviour. The next few questions got me to think about how I react and feel when people believe things that aren't true about me. I can be very sensitive and place a lot of value on how I'm perceived by others. I've been through many significant experiences of this so many times in my adult life. When gossip and lies are spread about me, or someone comes to an incorrect assumption, it makes me feel incredibly angry and upset. It feels like a huge injustice. I quickly jump to a victim mentality and feel rejected, often when that's not the case at all. I felt proud to realise, though, in my experiences, I have learned ways to cope with this. My most poignant experience of this was when my best friend died of suicide over a decade ago now. I discovered death really brings out the worst in people, and at that time, so many awful things were said by me and others when we were in pain. And during this period, a lot of lies were spread about me. As I was already struggling from losing someone so significant to my life, this was a very dark and difficult period. It was the first time that I really learnt I could not control this situation, and as I had a young baby at the time, I had to carry on and not fall into that black hole. I held my head high, knowing these lies were not true. I concentrated on my own life and focused on being grateful for the many positives that I had. I worked through the pain of losing the people who believed those lies, people I thought were my friends and loved me, and the pain of feeling such rejection. After a long time, I realised that this had been a good thing. It removed a lot of toxic people from my life and very clearly showed me the people who really care and love me. The ones who were there for me during this period, and it actually ended up bonding me to some wonderful friends and family that enrich my life today. It was absolutely liberating to realise, as long as I know my truth and can be proud of my own behaviour, or forgive myself for bad behaviour and address it, I can always hold my head high and let go of worrying about how others see me. The next question focused on gossip and criticism, what information I pass on without checking if it's true. In particular, this really got me thinking about work. I work in an office environment and gossip and criticism is rife, especially when work is particularly stressful. Over several months, I began to notice at work how gossip can be incredibly toxic, destroy morale, and cause unnecessary anger and feelings of unfairness, usually from a lack of understanding of the entire situation. I looked at what part I played in this, and I decided to make a new rule to never participate in gossip. This was actually much harder than I thought it would be. Gossiping about others can ironically be a bonding experience, but it's definitely not a healthy one. It's also a common misconception that it releases frustration and it's better to get it out than keep it in. But it often left me feeling guilty about the things I'd said, especially when I'd later find out more information. It made me realise I never know what's really happening with other people. I also realised it can damage my reputation and therefore career. And when I look back at my 20s and some of the things I said and did in an office environment, I saw how it really held me back from progressing. It's taken me 4 years of practice to not get involved with gossip and criticism, and instead try to add a positive message if I find myself in a situation where someone is being negatively spoken about. I am not perfect though. I slip back to old behaviours so easily sometimes, and I have to work at this every day. But I have found I'm progressing in my career much quicker than ever before, and I have much more respect from my peers and my superiors. I also don't have to feel guilty and shameful of anything I have said, and I will never again have to experience that mortifying feeling of speaking about someone behind their back just to discover they're standing behind me. I've realised I can check in on reality if I look first at my own thoughts and feelings about something I've been told and question myself about what triggers I have and where they could be coming from. And I start to understand what I'm adding to information that I pass on. It then also shows me that others will have added their own biases and distortions by the time that information gets to me. The final few questions got me to look at how I can tell the difference between how I see things and how they really are. This was quite difficult and really got me thinking. Surely my reality is the only one I've got in this world. But then I started to consider the denial and fantasies I created as a child, and how when I've done this as an adult, I realised when things are really painful and emotive, facts get distorted, and I've often turned to fantasy to cope, denying the reality of a painful situation. And this has led me down some very dark paths and engaging in behaviour I'm not proud of. This is what led me to immoral behaviours that were certainly not virtuous, but they were a defence mechanism and allowed me to cope day to day and temporarily give me the dopamine boost that I was so desperately craving. I realised I was carrying huge amounts of guilt and shame and denial, which was eating me up and affecting my self-worth. Denial has been my friend for a long time. I have the best ability to put on a smile and act like nothing's wrong in my life. I've been doing it for a very long time. I just thought it was a very British behaviour, a stiff upper lip and all that. It was just something that needed to happen so I can get done what needs to be done, whether that is work or taking care of the kids or the 1,000,001 things on my never-ending to-do list. This behaviour has been extremely useful for me. In fact, I'm usually at my most productive and extremely motivated when I'm in pain. When my best friend died, I managed to start a business, study for a degree, do volunteer work, all while having 2 very young children. When I'm hurting, I want to avoid that feeling of pain for as long as possible and use the energy to do productive and positive things. It's often the only time that my house is clean and tidy. I'm so good at utter denial, and it really worked for me for a while. But then I crash and burn. I can't get out of bed, move off the sofa. I do the bare minimum to cover what needs to be done, while to-do lists pile up around me. I take my misery out on the people I love, and I'm not a very nice person to be around, and life becomes unmanageable. I realised I need to find a balance, and I can start to do this by being honest with myself and taking care of me. Nowadays, when someone asks me how I am, and I immediately resort to putting on that smile and cheerfully greeting them back and tell them I'm great, completely ignoring the facts of my current reality, I've started to check in internally and ask myself, how am I really? And how am I feeling today or in the present moment? Recently, I've begun to work through the denial and be more honest with myself and others. So when someone asks me how I am when I'm not okay, I can just say, actually, I'm not so good. But then just explain I don't want to talk about it at the moment, and I will when I'm ready. This also gives me time to process things and have a clearer perspective on my current reality. I've been really surprised how easily people accept this and then understand I'm not at my best and treat me kindly. The final question in this section was, who had I hurt by being dishonest? And I realised at the top of my list should be me. I have hurt myself time and time again, making difficult situations much, much worse by refusing to acknowledge my reality. By being honest with myself, I'm able to stop ignoring my feelings and admit my shortcomings. I can prioritise my own well-being and be gentle with myself. I can check my motives and my actions. I seem to always find that fear and rejection are behind so many of the behaviours that do not serve me, and I've realised this by simply questioning myself, examining what I've done, and as I do more and more of these subjects, I began to see where they may have stemmed from, why I do certain things and feel a certain way. When I can be conscious and honest about this, and believe me, this is a process that does not happen overnight, but it leads to incredible personal growth. Remember, until we get our secrets out into the light, they keep us trapped. Thank you for listening, and I hope this was useful for you. I must also credit the music by Les FM from Ukraine and my amazing team who have helped me to create this. If you found this podcast useful, please like and subscribe and join me in the next episode.